And we begin with the kind of breaking news that most presidents do not go through in an entire term. We have breaking news, and here is the context. The FBI director is the only presidential post that serves a 10-year term to protect law enforcement from partisan pressure. That's why it was such a big deal when Trump fired James Comey. That was in his very first year in office, and that ousting of a director in the middle of his term was so suspicious, it actually helped spark the Mueller probe, which unearthed and convicted many crimes. Trump replaced Comey with Chris Wray. His confirmation hearings included scrutiny on Trump's bid to try to take more partisan control of the FBI and what Wray thought of the 10-year term, since he would be reporting to the president who wanted to use the threat of another firing to try to take that partisan control. So while we're going to get into all of the breaking news, I always try to give you the facts and context first. And this news only makes sense if you remember that Wray himself testified under oath that the 10-year term was the right approach for that independence.
I think the FBI director has a 10-year term because there is a judgment made that the role of the FBI and the role of the FBI director needs to be one that is independent of partisan politics.
Wray saying under oath, you have to be independent. You have to hold strong to the term against those partisan pressures, which were very clearly on display from then President Trump. So keep that in mind, because the news tonight is that Chris Wray has now announced he is quitting early. He will resign, he says, at the end of President Biden's administration. And now I'll show you what he might have hoped you only saw in isolation without the context and the history I just showed you. Mr. Wray offering a new and opposite rationale of what he said under oath. Contradicting what he said, that the 10-year term is what protects independence, he now just sort of blithely says the opposite, that quitting early will avoid his bureau from being dragged further into the partisan fray.
After weeks of careful thought, I've decided the right thing for the bureau is for me to serve until the end of the current administration in January and then step down. And in my view, this is the best way to avoid dragging the Bureau deeper into the fray while reinforcing the values and principles that are so important in how we do our work.
Well, both explanations cannot be true. Where we got here from is the entire Trump partisan pressure vengeance campaign that you've been hearing about for many years. So even if you only occasionally follow the news, you're probably familiar with the context, that the pressure is from Trump, who vowed to fire Wray next month. He's already named someone to replace him, which is what you do when you have a vacancy, right? He wants to push in a controversial partisan warrior, Kash Patel, who has talked about closing down FBI headquarters and abusing police powers against the so-called deep state or political opponents or journalists or all the above. Wray replaced a director who was controversial for many reasons, but James Comey did not buckle to Trump's demands for loyalty. He documented them as evidence and just kept on working. He certainly did not quit in advance. In fact, a later federal investigation showed it was Comey's independence, among perhaps other things, but the independence is really what got him fired by Trump. People who take an oath to the Constitution are supposed to withstand pressure. And by definition, pressure and threats includes the carrying out of those professional threats. They're supposed to be able to take a firing over carrying out illegal orders. Former FBI Director Mueller was long the gold standard for leading the FBI beyond partisanship. This is something that there used to be some agreement on. Wray, tonight, fails those precedents. He resigns early, run out of the Bureau by this long-running partisan campaign, which he has now oddly helped. Because had he stayed in office, Trump would have had to at least decide to fire another director in order to get his way. Now the president-elect can say he's just filling a vacancy, which there will be. Wray caving today also shows how these partisan efforts can be effective. A nonpartisan official whose job was not supposed to end with Biden's administration, who was literally picked by Trump in the first place, is now surrendering in advance in public. Normalizing this FBI director role is now something that at least more partisan presidents could bend to their will. Remember, there are valid criticisms of Joe Biden. We've covered them, but Joe Biden, when he came into office, did not replace the FBI director, even though this was one chosen by Trump. Now, across 2 terms, going into this next one, Trump has effectively hobbled this big post-Watergate reform. It was the FBI that was abused in Watergate in all sorts of ways. That is what some of these people quite directly want to do now. It's happened before. That's why when Americans say, oh, how bad could it could get as bad as Watergate or worse. Remember, they didn't have Fox News and Elon Musk running Twitter during Watergate. So this reform that was supposed to bolster FBI independence from Nixonian meddling is crumbling, sadly, with partly the help of FBI Director Wray just cutting and running, quitting early. And that's why reaction to the news today has focused on this point.
Really unfortunate. A 10-year term should be a 10-year term.
Feels like, he's not going to get a profile in courage.
The whole point is to have that position be outside of direct political influence.
We set up an FBI director to have a 10-year term, so they're not going to fall under undue political influence.
What you hear there is a DOJ vet and some lawmakers just restating that premise, which Wray himself testified about more than once in those hearings I mentioned.
10-year term specifically contemplates that there could and almost inevitably would be changes in administration during the course of the tenure. And unlike other presidential appointees, the theory is, I think rightly, that the FBI has both a criminal law enforcement and an intelligence role that sort of transcends political policy positions and needs to be kind of kept apart and above from that.
Kept above those politics, and he says the term does that, quote, I think rightly, under oath. They testified on that point during a specific period of time when Trump's move against the FBI was widely viewed as beyond the pale, when many in Washington were bracing for the ensuing probe, what they called the Mueller probe, that people thought would be a significant thing, might hobble his presidency, might get people in trouble, certainly got a lot of his aides in trouble. And the Comey firing, remember, was still roiling the Capitol.
President Trump has fired James Comey as the director of the FBI.
It is an unusual move that hasn't happened since the administration of Bill Clinton.
A day after James Comey testifies on Capitol Hill, he fires the director of the FBI, who is currently leading an investigation into the president's campaign.
In fact, when I decided to just do it, I said to myself, I said, this Russia thing with Trump and Russia is a made-up story.
President Trump has just announced he's nominating former Department of Justice official Christopher Wray as the new FBI director.
Wray was his pick to replace Comey, and he went through a heck of a lot through that decision, the ensuing investigations. But Wray is not good enough for second-term Trump. That is a sign. It is a type of partisan admission. The very person he picked doesn't fit with what they want to do now, as he publicly vows retribution, as he vows to pardon people who attacked police officers and tried to kill lawmakers, Republican and Democratic alike, as if there should be any such partisan distinction. So what we are going into is very clearly as bad as what they tried to do last time, and worse, because it's farther for what they want to do this time. It is not a time to tune out. It is not a time to give up. It is not a time to surrender in advance to nonpartisan principles of justice and the rule of law, what they used to call the American way. And I say that even knowing that the director of the FBI did very clearly surrender in advance today.